On the morning of April 20th, 2026, a 27-year-old man named Julio César Jasso Ramírez took an Uber to one of the most visited places on Earth. He had stayed at a hotel nearby the night before. He had packed carefully: tactical pants, tactical boots, a jacket. Underneath the jacket, a t-shirt with a specific phrase printed on it. A phrase he had chosen deliberately, one that meant something specific to a specific community. A phrase that would only make sense to investigators hours later when they started piecing together who he was and why he was there. He had a backpack. Inside it, a revolver, a knife, 52 rounds of .38 caliber ammunition, bus tickets, an analog cell phone, not a smartphone, an analog phone, which tells you something about how carefully he had thought this through, and a collection of literature, photographs, and handwritten notes that investigators would later describe as among the most disturbing personal effects they had ever recovered from a crime scene. Teotihuacan is not a random place. It is an ancient city northeast of Mexico City, built more than 2,000 years ago by a civilization that historians still do not fully understand. At its peak, around 450 AD, it was one of the largest cities in the entire world, larger than Rome at the time, larger than anything in the Americas, a place where perhaps 100,000 people lived. Nearly 1.8 million tourists visited it in 2025 alone. On the morning of April 20th, 2026, there were thousands of people there. Families, couples, school groups, tourists from a dozen countries who had flown across the world to stand on something ancient and feel something they could not name. Among them, a 32-year-old Canadian woman, a 6-year-old Colombian boy, a 61-year-old American woman, citizens of Russia, Brazil, the Netherlands, the United States, Colombia. At approximately 11:20 in the morning, Jasso climbed to the top of the Pyramid of the Moon, 43 meters high, at the northern end of the Avenue of the Dead, and began firing. Julio César Jasso Ramírez was born on September 9, 1998, in Tlapa, Guerrero, a city in southern Mexico, one of the poorer regions of the country. By 2026, he was living in Gustavo A. Madero, a borough in the northern part of Mexico City. He had visited Teotihuacan before April 20th, not once, but multiple times. Investigators confirmed he had scouted the site carefully, walked the grounds, studied the layout, identified vantage points. He knew exactly where he was going and exactly where he would position himself when the time came. He chose the Pyramid of the Moon specifically, not the Pyramid of the Sun, which is larger and more famous, the Pyramid of the Moon at the far northern end. From its summit, you can see everything. You can see the crowds moving along the avenue below. You can see the whole ancient city laid out beneath you. It is a position of absolute domination over the landscape. He knew what he was doing. April 20th is not a random date. April 20th, 1999, Columbine High School, Littleton, Colorado. Two students, Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, walked into their school with guns and bombs and killed 12 students and one teacher. It was the first school shooting to receive nationwide 24-hour live television coverage, giving both shooters near-instant, worldwide, permanent infamy. By the end of the day on April 20th, 1999, Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold were the most famous teenagers in the world. In the years that followed, something happened that researchers have been documenting ever since. Thousands of young people compiled hit lists, phoned in bomb threats, brought guns to school, and divulged Columbine fantasies online. Before the end of 2007, 12 rampage shootings had occurred in the United States. 8 of the shooters specifically mentioned Columbine. 8 out of 12. That is not a coincidence. That is a pattern. 24 years after the massacre, there had been over 100 plots of targeted violence worldwide inspired by it, with 21 carried out, killing 89 people. Researchers gave it a name, the Columbine effect, and Julio César Jasso Ramírez had it. He had it completely. He expressed admiration for Adolf Hitler. He generated an AI photo of himself with Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold as if they were together, as if he belonged with them. The attack occurred on the 27th anniversary of the Columbine shooting and on Hitler's 137th birthday. He had chosen the date years before he got on the Uber.
Let me walk you through the backpack carefully. Because the contents of that backpack are not just evidence of a crime. They are a psychological portrait of a person assembled over years that tells you exactly what he believed and exactly who he thought he was. The revolver, an old one, not a modern semi-automatic weapon, an old revolver with a plastic bag of 52 cartridges held in his other hand while he fired. The weapon itself was almost deliberately anachronistic, as if the modernity of the crime was less important than its symbolism. The tactical backpack, the tactical pants, the boots. This is clothing chosen for a specific reason, not for utility, but for image. The aesthetic of a mass shooter, assembled carefully, worn deliberately. The clothing is part of the performance. The t-shirt underneath. The phrase, disconnect and self-destruct. This phrase is associated specifically with online communities that grew up around the Columbine subculture. If you know it, you know what it means. It is a signal to insiders, a declaration of membership in a community that most people do not even know exists. The books about Columbine, not one book, multiple, carried physically in a backpack to the scene of the crime. The handwritten notes. He had written that he was guided by an inspiration from beyond, that he followed orders from supernatural entities. That psychological reframing, taking personal agency out of a violent act and replacing it with destiny or divine instruction, is a documented feature of certain types of mass violence perpetrators. It is a way of removing moral responsibility from the equation. If supernatural entities ordered you to do this, then you are not a murderer, you are an instrument. And then there was the photograph. Among his belongings was a photo modified by artificial intelligence, an image he had created himself. In it, Jasso appeared alongside Eric Harris and Dylan Kleinberg, as if they were a group, as if he belonged with them. He had put himself in the picture, literally. He manufactured his own legend before he even left the hotel. At approximately 11:20 in the morning on April 20th, 2026, Jasso had an argument with several people near the top of the Pyramid of the Moon. Witnesses reported raised voices. Then the shooting started. He fired approximately 20 to 30 shots. He fired at tourists on the pyramid and targeted approaching security forces. A group of visitors was unable to escape. The attacker ordered them to lie on the ground before walking to another spot, reloading and continuing to shoot. Brenda Lee, a Canadian tourist from Vancouver, and others in her group thought they heard firecrackers at first. Then someone said, "No, that is gunfire, run." She saw people coming off the top of the pyramid. There were thousands of people there that morning, thousands of people processing the sound of gunshots at the top of an ancient pyramid, trying to work out if what they were hearing was real. The human brain resists that kind of information. It finds alternatives, firecrackers, a vehicle backfiring, anything other than the thing it is. She said there were a lot of gunshots that just kept coming, and then a fellow jumped.
It was someone trying to get away, and he dropped to the next level, but he fell on his back, and it was just awful. People threw themselves to the ground and lay motionless. Others fled down the steep structure as gunshots echoed across the site. While he held tourists at gunpoint, Jasso spoke. In video footage recorded by bystanders, he can be heard telling people he was going to sacrifice them, a reference to the human sacrifices performed at pre-Columbian sites. He told tourists from Europe in a fake Spanish accent that they would not be returning home. He was performing. Even in the middle of it, he was performing. These are not the actions of someone in a dissociative state. These are the actions of someone who had scripted this in his head many times and now was executing the script. The National Guard arrived 10 minutes after the shooting started. Members scaled the pyramid under fire. They shot Jasso in the leg. Cornered at the summit of an ancient pyramid, with National Guard soldiers below him and a wounded leg and nowhere to go, he raised the revolver and shot himself. The 32-year-old Canadian woman was dead. 13 others were injured. The youngest was 6 years old. The Pyramid of the Moon was closed indefinitely. Now I want to talk about the true crime community, because this story makes it impossible not to, and I want to do it carefully. The true crime community, in its broadest sense, is an enormous, diverse, overwhelmingly healthy phenomenon. Millions of people worldwide who are fascinated by the psychology of crime, the mechanics of investigations, the stories of victims, the questions of justice and injustice that real cases raise. That is a legitimate and deeply human impulse, and there is nothing wrong with it. But within that community, at a specific, dark, relatively small edge, there is a subset that operates very differently. An online subculture that emerged from forums established after the Columbine massacre to discuss and, in some cases, glorify such violence. A subculture where perpetrators are treated not as cautionary examples, but as figures of fascination, even admiration. This subculture has a documented real-world impact that is impossible to ignore after what happened at Teotihuacan. In April 2019, an 18-year-old woman who was fixated on Columbine flew from Miami to Denver and headed to a local gun store where she bought a pump-action shotgun. Schools in the Denver area were closed. She was later found dead of an apparent self-inflicted gunshot wound. Nicholas Cruz, the Parkland shooter, had researched and attempted to replicate the Columbine mass shooting. And then, 2 weeks before the Teotihuacan attack, on April 7, 2026, a 15-year-old student in Santa Fe, Argentina, walked into his school, stabbed one student to death, and wounded 8 others. Argentine authorities linked him publicly to the true crime community, specifically to online spaces connected to the Columbine subculture. 2 attacks, 2 different countries, 2 different perpetrators, no connection to each other. The same subculture. Here's the psychology that explains all of this, not the specific case, the mechanism underneath it. The word that researchers use most often is not copycat, it is contagion, and the distinction is important. A copycat implies imitation. You see something and you reproduce it. Contagion implies something more biological, something that spreads through a medium, something that enters a host and replicates from the inside. The American Psychological Association defines social contagion as the spread of behaviors, attitudes, and affect through crowds and other types of social aggregates from one member to another. The copycat theory theorizes that some perpetrators of mass violence are motivated by the extensive media coverage of past violent events and are seeking instant fame and notoriety. The key word there is fame. Researchers have determined that fantasies of infamy and attention are key aspects of the psychological identities of mass shooters, and that their belongings and writings are filled with references to past murderers. This is what Jasso's AI-generated photograph tells you. He was not just inspired by the Columbine killers. He wanted to be with them. He wanted to be in their category, to be counted among them, to have his name said in the same breath as theirs. And here is the uncomfortable truth that every person who makes content about mass violence, including me right now, has to sit with. Researchers say it is likely impossible to quantify media influence on attacks. A leading expert on this topic put it simply: there is not one thing to blame. It is not only the media. It is not only the guns. When you look at things like Columbine or other types of events, these are perfect storms of many different factors. So I'm not standing here telling you that true crime content caused what happened at Teotihuacan. That's not what the evidence says. But what happened on April 20th, 2026 in Mexico cannot be disconnected from what happened on April 20th, 1999 in Colorado. And what happened in Colorado cannot be disconnected from every news broadcast, every online forum, every piece of content that kept those names alive and visible and searchable for 27 years. The mechanism is real. The research is clear. And the only honest thing to do with that knowledge is to say it out loud. Teotihuacan was not just a tourist site in April 2026. It was a cultural centerpiece of one of the biggest international events in the world. The attack occurred less than 2 months before Mexico co-hosted the 2026 FIFA World Cup with the United States and Canada. As part of the cultural programming linked to the World Cup, Teotihuacan was undergoing a $1.7 million renovation, its largest in 30 years. Violence of this kind was unprecedented at archaeological sites in Mexico in modern times. Teotihuacan had long been considered one of the safest tourist destinations in Mexico. In the week after the attack, metal detectors were installed at Teotihuacan and at 4 other major pre-Columbian sites across Mexico: Chichen Itza, Monte Alban, Palenque, Tulum. Some of the most ancient, most culturally significant, most historically important places in the Western Hemisphere. Now, because of one man with a backpack full of Columbine literature, they have metal detectors at the entrance. That's the reach of the Columbine effect in 2026. It is not contained to schools. It is not contained to the United States. It is not contained to any demographic or geography or economic condition. It is everywhere.
The 32-year-old Canadian woman who was killed at the Pyramid of the Moon on April 20th, 2026, had not been publicly named at the time this video was made. Out of respect for her family's privacy, her name had not been released. She had come to see something ancient, something that had stood for 2,000 years, something built by people who looked at the sky from that valley floor and decided to create something enormous and lasting and full of meaning. She was 32 years old. The 6-year-old Colombian boy who was also shot survived. He was discharged from hospital. Julio César Jasso Ramírez is dead. He killed himself at the summit of the Pyramid of the Moon after being shot in the leg by the National Guard. He left behind the backpack, the books, the notes, the photograph he made of himself. He also, in dying the way he died, at the top of an ancient pyramid, on the exact anniversary of his inspiration, in front of thousands of witnesses and cameras, he got exactly the ending he had written for himself.
And now, his name is in every news report, every analysis, every video like this one, which is the mechanism, which is always the mechanism. I want to leave you with something that Brenda Lee said when a reporter asked her if what had happened changed her perception of Mexico, of traveling, of the world. She said, "This is a fabulous city. We haven't felt unsafe anywhere, and honestly, this could happen anywhere in the world." She said it clearly, without drama, without anger, as a plain statement of fact from someone who had just lived through something that most of us will only ever hear about. She is right, and she is right in a way that goes beyond tourist safety. The ideology that produced Julio César Jasso Ramírez does not live in Mexico. It does not live in Colorado. It does not live in any specific country or city or community. It lives on servers, in forums, in comment sections and Discord channels and message boards in languages from every country on Earth. It is wherever the internet is, which is everywhere. The ancient city of Teotihuacan was built by people whose names we do not know, whose language we cannot fully read, whose religion we only partially understand. They built something that survived 2,000 years. On April 20th, 2026, a man climbed to the top of their most sacred structure and opened fire on strangers because 27 years ago, 2 teenagers in Colorado became the most famous killers in American history. And nobody has found a way to stop that chain from continuing yet. So, that is going to do it. If you got something out of today's story, if it made you think not just about what happened at Teotihuacan, but about the mechanism underneath it, the psychology, the contagion, the way that violence spreads through media and communities in ways that are documented and studied and still not solved, that is exactly what this channel is built for. We are not here to sensationalize. We are here to understand. And understanding starts with looking directly at things that are uncomfortable to look at. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. Thank you. Until next time, see you. Wait, don't go anywhere. If you're looking for more videos like this one, click here.